Well, hello everyone. We want to welcome you to a special live stream. Of course, I want to say good evening to those of you who are in the evening time zone. Good afternoon, good morning, wherever you are. Of course, with us here, a very dear brother and a famous theologian, I would say apologist, polemist, scholar. And if you've been really watching anything lately concerning the historical criticism of Islam in general, the name of Dr. J. Smith will pop up on your screen immediately. So I am honored, of course, for this friendship and this collaboration. And we've been doing a lot of things together. And today, I asked Dr. Smith if he can join me to give you a quick recap on some of the things that he's been doing, we've been doing together, any new discoveries related to the historical criticism of Islam, any new work that he's working on, and anything we're planning on doing together as well. And with that in mind, I want to welcome our dear brother, Dr. J. Welcome, brother.
Thank you. Good to be here.
So, Jay, we've been doing a lot of this, of course, the book, the man, the place, and all these kind of components. But it seemed like, every time we do a video series, there is always a new component, something that, you came across, someone from the research team came across. And it's been highlighting some of the major issues with what we call the standard Islamic narrative, nicknamed as sin, S-I-N. Now, could you kindly let's start with this. Could you explain to people, because I see that some new ones joining us today, what do we mean by sin or the standard Islamic narrative?
Yeah, in some ways, it's a tongue-in-cheek acronym that we borrowed from Dr. Yasser Qadhi. Dr. Yasser Qadhi is, I think most people would consider him the world's leading authority on what we know as the Qira'at. The Qira'ats are the ahruf. These are the readings that we discovered. I didn't discover them. It was actually, I knew about them, but I didn't discover the modern ones. It was our good colleague Hatun Tash. You know her, I know her. She was on my team in England when I was there, and I helped train her up for the Speaker's Corner down there at Hyde Park in London. And she accidentally came across about 4 or 5 of these different Qurans, these different Arabic Qurans, which are the different readings of the Quran all in Arabic, and they're all over 1,000 years old. Now, the books we have in our hands today aren't over 1,000, but they started to appear. They started to be created. They were starting to be written over 1,000 years in the 8th century, 9th century, and 10th century. Now, even when I say that, 8th, 9th, and 10th, I now have to smile because we don't have any one of their original manuscripts. We don't have any manuscript by Ibn Kathir or by Hafs or An Asim. We don't have any even by Asim himself or Kasai or Kalun. I mean, these names just kind of drip out of your mouths where they're well-known names. She came across 6 or 7 of them while she was in Morocco doing some training there for people. Just wanted to get one Arabic Quran, and when the guy behind the counter said, well, which one do you want? And he started naming, I have Hafs, I have Warsh, I have Kalun, I have Kasai. She said, hold on a minute. I thought there was only one Quran. I thought that this is something that is taught, yay high to a grasshopper. Every Muslim knows there's only one Quran. There's not one word, not one letter, not even a dot that has been changed in the last 1,400 years. Because if you have one word, just one word, or even one letter that is changed in the Quranic text, it's no longer inimitable. It's no longer eternal. And this is the claim the Quran has made. This is the claim every Muslim makes. We never make this claim about the Bible. We would never make these kind of claims, but Muslims will. They have to. In order to shut down the Bible, they have to make this claim because we have done our homework on our Bible. We know exactly where the manuscripts are. We know exactly what was in the original manuscript. We know we can pretty much reproduce our biblical text, 99.9% of it, just by looking at the manuscript evidence, looking at the Greek manuscript evidence, 5,800 Greek manuscripts, 10,000 Latin Vulgates, 19,000 other manuscripts in 11 different languages. You compare them, put them all together, you're coming up with around 24,000 manuscripts just by comparing them. you can pretty well know what 99.9%. Now, are they all early? No, they're not. We never made the claim that they're all early. What is important is that they come from different parts of the world, and they come from different languages written by different authors, but that's just the manuscript evidence. We also have what we call the lectionaries. These are the every day, every Sunday in church, they would do these readings straight out of scripture called lectionaries. And we have about 2,135 of them just from the 6th century alone. That's 100 years before Islam, 100 years before the Quran. So these all predate the Quran. And that's completely different genre, not the manuscript evidence, a completely different genre used as liturgy in the churches all over the Middle East. We can look at those and compare them with the 24,000 manuscripts. So we've got the manuscript evidence, we've got the lectionary evidence, and then we've got the early church fathers quotations. The early church fathers quotations are these disputes that they had in the first, second, third, up until the 4th century. They would have people that were coming into the church. Many of them were Gnostics who did not believe that God could take on bodily form. They were confronting the church fathers. And so the church fathers, rather than debate them theologically, they would just write letters, and they would quote verbatim, verse after verse after verse, taken straight out of the scripture. And those have been retained today. They are written on papyrus. Many of them have been found in these pits, these trash heaps, like Oxyrhynchus in Egypt. Probably thousands have been found in these trash heaps where books were thrown out. Many of these these early church fathers quotations written in letters were then made into paper mache masks later on. And now they've bought up those masks, and they've been able to reduce them back to their original papyrus form or parchment form, mostly papyrus form, and they're able to take them and read them. And we have 86,000 of those that we now have access to. 86,000 of these early church fathers quotations. Now, are they early? No. 36,000 of them are early, though. That's what's interesting. And those 36,000 early church fathers quotations, all before the 4th century. So that means before the manuscripts, before the Sinaiticus, which is 4th century, before the Vaticanus, which is 4th century, before the Alexandrinus, which is 5th century, known as the 3 Metropolitan Codices. Those are the complete New Testament manuscripts that we have on. They're all in Greek, and that's why they are the earliest complete manuscripts. But these early church fathers quotations predate that. And they're a completely genre separate from that. They're not written on parchment. They're not written on vellum, as these Metropolitan Codices are. These are written on papyrus, which disintegrates, but they've been preserved because they were made into masks. Now, as unpacking them and breaking down the masks and now putting them out and looking at them, we can read them and we can look at them, just these 36,000. Let me give you an example of the Gospel of John. Gospel of John is probably the best one amongst them, because the Gospel of John, by looking at these early church fathers quotations from before the 4th century, so that's before 300 AD, they can reproduce every verse, every word of the Gospel of John except for 11 sentences. Except for 11 sentences. Can you see what we're talking about? That's the treasure trove we have with the Bible. We have so much with the Bible. So we ask the same questions. We say, listen, we've got so many thousands of manuscripts. We've got 2,000 lectionaries. We have 36,000 quotations that predate the 4th century. We can reproduce the entire Gospel of John except for 11 verses. What do you have, Muslims? Because you're the one that makes the claim that yours is preserved eternally. You're the one that makes the claim. It's not just you. It's the Quran itself that makes this claim in chapter 85. In chapter 85, verse 21 and 22, it's the Quran that says, talks about these preserved tablets. Look at every one of the exegetes on Quran, chapter 85, verse 21 and 22. Look at Ibn Kathir, you name any of it. Suyuti, Baidawi, Zamakhshari. Look at all the exegetes as they exegete that scripture, and what do they say? These two verses are referring to the eternal tablets. The Quran was never created; it has always existed, and that's why chapter 85 is there. So Muslims, when they make this claim, they're not making it up. It's the Quran that makes this claim. But more than that, the Quran continues and makes other claims about this preserved tablet, this Quran that is eternal, that has never been created. It says that nobody can change it. Not one word can be changed. In chapter 10, verse 15, in chapter 28, I'm sorry, 10 verse 15, chapter, I think it's in chapter 18 verse 27. It says, for no man, no human, you or me, nobody can change it. Because once we change one word, once man changes one letter, it's no longer eternal. It's no longer preserved. It's no longer inimitable. And how is it that if no man can change it? Well, because Allah himself preserves it. And that's in chapter 15, verse 9. In chapter 15, verse 9 of the Quran, for Allah will preserve it. Allah will guard it. So if Allah guards it, that means nobody can have come close to it and change one letter, one word, one dot, or one vowel, or one diacritic mark. If that is the case, then of course Muslims have to come up with some type of proof for that. And so we've always asked them, haven't we, Al-Fadi? You and I have gone, we've done 60 episodes just on how the Quran was created.
It's actually more than that. I think it's pushing 70, brother. But yeah, it's about a book called, Creating the Quran.
And we're just halfway through the number 40, right? On your site. I haven't even yet put it on my site yet. And here we're asking this very same question. Since you say it's uncreated, we're going to prove and we're going to show you using what Dr. Stephen Shoemaker has come up with to show it is full of creation. There is an enormous amount of manipulation. There is an enormous amount of accretions and deletions and corruptions all the way through its creation. And here's what's crazy about it. And this is stuff we have yet to even introduce yet. We're now looking at these qira'ats. See, the qira'at are probably the most devastating amongst all of this preservation argument. The reason why is that you don't just have one or two or three or four. And there's the book right there, Creating the Quran by Dr. Stephen Shoemaker. Folks, get that book. Everybody, get it in your library. You need to get it because he has done a wealth. He's brought together all the best research on the Quran and has put it into one book, quoting scholar after scholar. This is not just summation. This is not just hyperbole, exaggeration of things he thinks or his opinion. In fact, he's very careful not to put his opinion there. He is writing what other scholars have found. And then he's saying, okay, let's open it. What does this mean? If this scholar is saying here, what does that mean for the creation of the Quran? What does that mean for the text of the Quran? What does that mean for this claim that the Quran has never had no human intervention? And so that's why that book's such a great book. But what's fascinating on this area of qira'at, he doesn't really get into qira'at very much on this. We get into it. You and I have done this. And amazing reason why we get into it is because we have been at the forefront of this because of Hatun Tash. Thank God for that 5'2" girl. That she has destroyed the Quran single-handedly because she found 26 of these back in by 2016, just by going to places like Jordan. She went to Yemen and she went up way over to Morocco, and she just started collecting them. And you can collect them in the bookstores. I have 9 of them right up there. Take a look right up there. Those are all qira'ats. 9 different qira'ats, 9 different what we call different readings. Now, hold on a minute. And this is something that's coming out. You have not heard this yet. And this is something that we're going to talk about. You've heard me say 30 qira'ats, right? No, I'm sorry. You've heard me say 10 qira'ats. That means 7 by Ibn Mujahid and 3 by Al-Jazari, right? Jazari. 7 from 10th century, 936, that were chosen, not written, but chosen by Ibn Mujahid. And then another 3 that were chosen by Al-Jazari in the 15th century, 1429. So 7 that were chosen about roughly 300 years after Muhammad, if Muhammad had existed, and then another 3 that were chosen by Al-Jazari 800 years after Muhammad existed. So you can see there's a problem right there. How can you choose different Qurans? These are the creme de la creme. These are the 10 major ones, right? But from every 10, there are 2 students. Am I correct?
Yeah, they are the transmitters. You have the reader and has 2 transmitters. Right there, you have 20 already, just using that count.
Well, actually, you're right. You have 14 plus another 6. But here's the fascinating thing. These are known as riwayats or rawis. Rawis for plural, riwayats. You can probably say it much better than I can in the Arabic because I'm desecrating your language. Forgive me for that. So these students are known as rawis or riwayats. Now, here's something you've never heard before. That's not all. Every one of those riwayats had 2 students themselves, known as tariqs. Ooh, there go the balloons. See, even my computer is excited about this. I didn't do that. The computer decides it wants to celebrate. 10 for every one of these riwayats. How many riwayats did we just got done saying? 20, right?
That's right.
So now you have another 40, right? 2 for each. 40 plus 20 makes 60, plus the original 10, that makes 70, right? And then we have just now found out that for every one of those tariqs, there's another whole genre of tariqs, of 2 of each of those tariqs. So that's a 4th generation of what readers, or you might say students. So that makes 40 plus 2, that's another 80. So add that up. 80 plus 40, you can see right now we're already getting over 100 right there, 120 plus the other original 30. So 120 plus 30, 150 different Qurans we're up to now.
And let me add something, Dr. J, because I can tell that a Muslim is going to say, well, thank you guys for saying this. You just proved to us what we call the chain of transmission. Absolutely not. It actually destroys it, simply because there are so many errors, so many different ways of reading the Quran. If it came really from one source and you have that many eyewitness, we won't be talking about different qira'at in the first place.
Yeah, and this is the beauty of this whole thing. People say it doesn't change a thing. These are just pronunciation differences. You say potato, I say potato. You say tomato, I say tomato, potato, potato. You know that famous song. That's not what's happening here. These are not just vowelization. If it was just vowelization, a dhamma or a kasra change with a fatha, if that's all it was, fine. Then we're just talking about the same word, but different pronunciation. You pronounce it different than I, but it's the same word. No, this changes the word completely in almost every case. I don't want to say every case, but in almost every case. And we're going through that. I mean, when we held up these 26 in 2016, so we're talking about 8 years ago, we held these up for the first time. What do you think we did right after that? Even while we were on the ladder, and Muslims haven't paid attention to this, we then held up slide after slide. We were holding them up, and we had to cellophane them because we knew they were going to try to tear them. And you can see right on film, they grabbed them from our hands to tear them, because what we did, we put the Hafs and we put the Warsh next to each other. Just 2. We took 2 out of the 26 that we had. We just do 2, and we did verse by verse, sentence by sentence, word by word comparison, looking at them in Arabic. This is not the translation. We weren't looking at the translation. We just compared word by word. And you saw there's a dot above making a nun, and then this over here, it's a dot below making it a B. So from an N to a B, that changes the word. But not only does it change the word, it changes the meaning. Not only does it change the meaning, in some cases it changes the theology. In some cases it changes the doctrine. In other cases it changes the practice. This has wholesale changes. And this is something that Muslims do not want me to say, or you to say, or anybody else say. They don't want us to look at these. They don't want us to look at these changes. That's what we're doing now. We're now unpacking every one of them. Now, Dr. Shadi Nasser is the world's leading authority on this. One of my students in my class is the one that has found 100 of these 150 different qira'ats and riwayats and tariqs. So there's 3 genres. Qira'ats, which are the readings, or akhruf, if you want to interchange them there. Then you have the riwayats, which are the associate, these are the students. And then the students of those students are the tariqs, which is, again, another common word in Arabic. And what is the translation for tariq? How would you translate it?
You're saying tariq?
No, tariq, not the KH. It's not history.
Tariq. There is, what I'm hearing you say, either history or way, basically.
Way. It's the way. It's not the history.
Yeah. Okay.
It's a different way of saying this. Of not even saying the same thing, and that's the fascinating thing about this, Doctor. We have someone that's working with. I can't give you his name. I'm not permitted to, but he's a good friend of both of ours. Who's working with Dr. Shadi Nasser, and he is now finding. He said, "Listen, there's more than 100. We found 93,000 differences between these 30, just the first 30 that we've looked at. He is now saying it's way more than. It's already over 100,000 that he has found. So we're just going to sit back and wait to see what how many we're coming up with. So we're talking about tens of thousands of difference, and every one of them changes the meaning. Every one of them changes the word, which already right there shuts down this whole notion that the Quran has been preserved perfectly. absolutely eradicates that. We've not even had a chance to collect the 150 that we now know out there. I would imagine many of them have been destroyed. We won't be able to find all 150. We've already found 37. And I know that we're going to be looking for more. Now we're going to be looking for even more, because we want to at least get at least 80 of them. If we can get 80 of them and preserve them before the Muslims, see, the Muslims are going to buy them up and destroy them because they don't want the evidence out there. The difficulty is they should have done this 1,000 years ago. They should have done this, well, more than that. They should have done this at the time of Ibn Mujahid, because what was happening, according to Dr. Shadi Nasser, many of these riwayats had many students. Let me just give you Asim, who was the Qirat, or the teacher of Hafs, which is Hafs is the one that we use today here in the West. This is the most popular one, Hafs an Asim. We always call it Hafs an Asim. And so Hafs is the one that we have from Kufa. He died in 796. His teacher was also from Kufa. But here's the funny thing. He wasn't the only student. There were 91 students under Asim. Only he and Kalun were chosen. 2 of them out of the 91. What about the other 89? What happened to their Qurans? See, we're talking about another 89 Qurans that are missing today. Well, that's one reason why Al-Shatibi in the 12th century and then Al-Jazari in the 15th century had to come and choose some even more, had to choose many more to accommodate this, to ameliorate this, because there were so many from which to choose from. So that's one reason we're now going and we're unpacking this. Now, I'm not doing this research. I'm just communicating it so the world can understand it, because the people who are doing this research are doctorates. They all are academics. They have chairs in universities. They have to protect those chairs. They cannot say what they're finding. So they're feeding us the material so that we can use it. And that's why, Al-Fadi, what you're doing here on this channel in CIRA International and what I'm doing on Fander Films is to take this academic work that Muslims will not do. They won't do this academic work. They won't actually go and show you how different these are. All they'll do is say, these are no different. They don't change any doctrine. They don't change any theology. We're showing and we're shutting that down real quickly. And we're not saying that we believe they changed the doctrine. We're letting you look word by word, phrase by phrase, sentence by sentence, verse by verse, and say, you decide, are these 2 different sentences? Are these 2 different meanings? You decide that as the people who are watching. So we're letting the people come to that decision. And it's categorically across the board. Everybody is now realizing that what Islam has been telling us and what Muslims have been telling us, not for 1,400 years, not even for 1,300 years, only for about 1,000 years, has been absolutely lies. These have been lie upon lie upon lie. And we're shutting down that lie. Now, that's just one area of research. You want to come back to me on it before we go into some other areas that we're also engaged in?
Yes, and I want to just affirm what you're saying. I don't know if you're aware of this, but I'm going to read something right now that might astonish people. It was back in July 20th in the year 2020, so the year in the COVID time, on a liberal Saudi, basically, website known as Elaf. And there was a Kurdish writer who wrote about the fact that the Quran has so many changes that basically these changes today needs to be revisited and needs to be corrected. The changes that the author basically quoted another blogger or a journalist by the name of Ahmed Hashim, who is a Saudi actually. And Ahmed Hashim said the following in his article. His article was published in January 10th, 2020, before COVID, basically. And here's what it says. The title was Amending the Quran. Notice, amending the Quran. In other words, the Saudi author is saying, or journalist, we need to amend the Quran. He says the Quran as we know it was written down during the period of the 3rd Caliph. Of course, this is what the traditional Islamic narrative will say. Uthman bin Affan, using the Uthmanic script, which is named after him. Most Muslims believe that this version of the Quran, which was written in the 37th year after the Hijrah, meaning basically 27 years after the death of Muhammad, 10 years, including the migration from Mecca to Medina. That's why it's 37 years. Look what he's saying. He's saying, however, the Quran in its present form contains errors of spelling, syntax, and grammar, it is estimated that there are about 2,500 such mistakes. They were made by the committee tasked with compiling the Quran and include the addition or omission of letters in some words or substitutes. And then he goes on, Jay, to say, Uthman is not God. He's not inspired by God. He's just a human being like the rest of us. So why can't we today revisit the Quran and amend the Quran? It is amazing to read something like this in a Saudi newspaper by a Saudi journalist, and you would think he would be basically captured and imprisoned, but no, that's the direction we're taking these days.
Well, here's the problem. I mean, just that quote, isn't that amazing that he's making that type of admission? But he's also confusing two things. And this is a common error that many Muslims make. Listen, not just Muslims, everybody makes this error. And that is the qira'at versus the razm. You have two, and you know what I'm talking about. Maybe, why don't you unpack? What is the razm and what is the qira'at? And what is the difference between the two?
Okay, so the razm is the structure of the word itself, the letters. When you write like A, B, C, you know, let's say the word apple, okay? That's the razm, the A, the P, the L, the E, that's the razm. I'm simplifying it because in English it's very simple, but in Arabic, you have it like this as a raw structure, and then you start adding dots, you start adding diacritical marks, and that's where the reading is influenced now. So if the razm is not really dotted or the markings are not made correctly, or at least the markings are not identical from one reading to the other, and the same word, as Dr. Smith mentioned to you, could be read differently and the meaning would change completely.
Okay, now see, you use the word apple, right? But even your word apple is incorrect because you concluded A and E. The razm does not include A and E in Arabic. That's the problem.
I love you, Jay. You always have to argue back with me, but that's okay. I was just trying to.
And this is what people don't realize. Even your example, apple, or any word that we have in English, we include the vowels along with the consonants. Not so Arabic. So the original 7th century script did not have A or E or I. It didn't have any of those vowels. Those vowels did not exist in the 7th century.
Right. The vowel markings in the Arabic, that's correct, were not there initially. Correct.
So if I gave you a word and I say P-P-L, what is this word? You wouldn't know.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
You know any word? No, that is the problem right there. My name's a little easier because it's almost all consonants. Let's just use, here's a good one. McDonald's, right? McDonald's would be MCDNLD. Now, does it have MA in between? Is it McDonald's or McDonald's or McDonald's or McDonald? You could put where your vowels. So one of the problems was they weren't able to read the text. And back in the 7th century, there were only 16 of these consonants. Only 16. Today, there are now 28 in what you read because of those 5 dots that were added. And then the vowels that were 3 vowels that were added after that. So the 5 dots were created or were started to be created in the 8th and were finished and we think were canonized by the 9th century. The vowels continued to be changed because you have then the short, then you have even long vowels that continue up until the 10th century. So it wasn't only in the 10th century that you could really read this text that you had in front of you. But here's the problem. And even this Saudi Arabian isn't thinking this through. And the reason why is because they haven't looked at the earliest manuscripts. The earliest manuscripts, which is the top copy.
Just a traditional Muslim, obviously.
And see, we are looking at the earliest manuscripts, and that includes the Topkapi from Istanbul, the Samarkand from Uzbekistan, the Ma'il, which is in London, the Petropolis, which is there in Paris. You have the Husseini manuscript, which is in Cairo, and then the Sana manuscript, which is in Sana'a in Yemen. Those are the 6 major ones. There are another 4 that have been added to begin and others that come after. But those are the first 6 Remember I said the Bible we have 5,800 Greek manuscripts and 10,000 Latin Vulgates. They only have 6 to go on compared to 1,800 that we have. They have 6 to go on that are the earliest. Now, I want to be careful because not all this 5,800 are early, or not all of the 10,000 Latin Vulgates or the 19,011 languages are early. But nonetheless, if you have these 6, see, he's not even going to those 6. And that's where Dan Brubaker's research has been so instrumental and so damaging. Because Dan Brubaker decided to do that in 2010. He was the first to ever do that. Here you have an American living in America, getting his doctorate at Rice University, the first man in history in 1,400 years to actually go and take and look at every one of the manuscripts, line by line by line by line, and looking and reading it for the first time, the manuscripts. Because remember what that guy said in his, the fellow said in his article? Why don't we go back and why don't we go and recreate the Quran again and make it one Quran? In order to do that, all you need to do is go back to the original manuscript. Do what Dr. Dan Brubaker did. That's what he got his doctorate for. He took 4 years to look at these 6 manuscripts and added another 4 on top of that. By 2014, he had found 800 different words. These are not kidduts. These are not dots and vowels. There are no dots and vowels in any of these. These are consonantal differences. These are rhythm differences. This changes the meaning completely. And you cannot, in this case, you cannot say, oh, this has nothing, this only has to do with pronunciation. No, this is our completely different sentences when you change the script, I'm sorry, when you change the consonants. So that is by far the most damaging. And that's why everybody is trying to shut down Dr. Dan Brubaker. And that's why Dr. Tayyip Al-Tukulich wrote an entire book against Dr. Brubaker, basically saying, you don't know what you're talking about.
It's called refutation, which is really not a refutation anyway. It was done, probably he was influenced to write something just to respond to this damage and discovery.
And he didn't even deal with what Dr. Brubaker was claiming. That's what's fascinating. Well, you can always find refutations of everybody's work if you just take 1 or 2 examples and then blow it up out of proportion, calling these nothing more than scribal errors. No, they weren't scribal errors. These are intentional differences. These are, and in many cases, and see, much of the material that Dan Brubaker did not even cover the Husseini manuscript. The Husseini manuscript is by far the most damaging because it is full of hundreds upon hundreds of coverings and coverings and coverings and tapings and tapings and coverings with written over top and coverings not written over top, just left blank. But in every case, every one of those coverings, which are entire sentences, sometimes entire lines, what is left behind now supports this text here, the Hafs Anasim. This one we have here. This is the one that was chosen. And he said, why don't we make one Quran and make it the original? Well, that was done in 1924, 100 years ago. What do you think Al-Husseini Al-Haddad was doing in Cairo University? I'm sorry, in Al-Azhar University in Cairo. That's what he did in 1924 because they could not standardize the tests for high school students because they were getting 30 different answers on every question about the Quran. That's why they needed Husseini to do that. So that was done 100 years ago. This author that's writing this article needs to go back and look at his own history. And that's why they chose this one here. Now, what they were choosing was not a consonantal text. They were choosing a Qira'at text. They were choosing a Qira'at in Ahruf derivation. They were choosing one, which was rather ironic because the one they chose is the one the Ottomans chose. And the reason he had to choose that is because the Ottomans controlled all these manuscripts. They owned these manuscripts for 700 years. Remember, since 1299 is when they came to power. Up until 1924, that 700-year period, they controlled the Topkapi, the Samarkand, the Ma'il, the Petropolitanus, the Husseini, and the Sana manuscript. They owned all of them and the other ones besides, and then dispersed them as presents to different peoples and to different countries. And that's why by 1924, they were dispersed to 6 different areas. But they had control over all of those manuscripts for 700 years. Who do you think then were the ones that actually censored every one of these texts and corrected them and put insertions and erase them and put another. And sometimes they, in one case like this, this one that he has from the Doha, they get the manuscript in Doha. He found 9 different times where Allah had to be added to the text. The name Allah had to be added above the line, below the line, to the side of the line. The name of God had to be added to the text. Why do you add God's name there? Well, obviously because it was missing in the Hafs text. I mean, it's in the Hafs text, but it wasn't in that manuscript. So in this case, in every case, you didn't even need God's name there. It is understood it's talking about God. But because of the fact that the Hafs text had it, they had to then introduce it into the Doha manuscript. So this has been going on for 700 years. This has been going on long before 1924. Many people think that what Dan Brubaker was saying happened the last 100 years. No, this all happened long before 1924. It happened since the 1300s. It's been going on. And that's why it's so fascinating when Muslims continue to make this claim that the Quran has been well preserved. Now, that's the one thing we're looking at. The other thing we're going to is now we're looking at Muhammad's name. And we're finding some fascinating things about Muhammad's name. And you brought Mel onto your program, and you've been going through his material systematically. Here's the problem, and this is why this is important. When we say that we can't find Muhammad's name anywhere at all in the 7th century, we can't find. If this is the greatest prophet in the history of mankind, if this is the prophet that was born in 570, there in a place called Mecca, and lived there until 622 in Mecca. So from 570, that's 50 years. His first 50 years, he lived in a city that we can't find any reference to. There's no reference to Mecca anywhere at all. We can't find it anywhere. If this is the case, then somewhere in the 7th century, we should find his name. Listen, if he is the caliph of the second biggest empire in all of that part of the world, you have the Byzantine Empire and you have what they say is the Islamic Empire. And remember, Muhammad is the one that created the Islamic Empire. If this becomes the largest empire after the Byzantine world, by the time of Muawiyah comes to power in 651, and even before, because Abu Bakr, Umar, Uthman, and Ali expanded the empire. So by the time the rightly guided caliphs died, when Ali died in the Battle of Siffin in 661, they owned from Tripoli in the west all the way to Afghanistan in the east, from Turkey in the north all the way down to Yemen in the south. And these 4 guys, including Muhammad, all lived in a place called Mecca and Medina. They were serving in Medina, though Mecca was the holy place. So Mecca and Medina are just a number of miles apart, and they're both there in what is the central part of Arabia. If that is the case, then someone somewhere at some time should have heard of this man and should have heard of Abu Bakr, Umar, Uthman, and Ali. We can't find any reference to those 4 guys. Oh, hold on a minute. There are lots of people called Ali. That's a very common name. There's lots of people called Umar. In fact, it's one of the most common names amongst the Lakhmid. The Lakhmids, that is a name that's common to the Lakhmid dynasty. The Lakhmids are people from Iraq, from way up in Tikrit, way up in northern Iraq today, on the Euphrates, the Tigris. It's the Euphrates River. That's a very common name in the 7th century. But that name is not any further south than that. So even the 4 rightly guided caliphs are in the wrong place. But what's most important, who cares about Abu Bakr, Umar, Uthman, and Ali? I don't really care about them. I want to know about Muhammad. I want to know this guy, because this is the guy that is the last prophet. This is the guy that is the final prophet. This is the guy that brings us the Quran. This is the guy that is the model for all Muslims everywhere at all times in all places. Am I correct? He is, isn't he? If that is the case, then there should be someone that had met him or spoke about him or wrote about him. We can't find one reference. Now, hold on a minute. The comeback to that is, Jay, hold on. Look at the 7th century. There's lots of references to Muhammad. Absolutely, there's lots of references, just like there are lots of references to Jay today. I'm not the only one that has the name Jay. It's a very common name. You're not the only one that has the name Abd al-Fadi. Abd means slave of. There's many people called Abdul, because that's short for Abdul. Abdul is one of the most common names in Islam. And just like there are many Muhammads today. Well, there were many Muhammads back then, but it was not a name back then. It was never a name. It's been made a name by the Muslims. They made it into a name. And it was nothing more than a title. It was a well-known title used by many people. because it means the praised one. It doesn't just mean the praised one. It means highly praised. It doesn't just mean highly praised. It has many meanings. Let me just make sure, and I want to share with them some. It means glorified. It means highly praised. It means the chosen one. It's also a messianic title. And it has been used all over that part of the world. And what this A.J. Deuce has really gone through, and he's done the research on this. He's from Switzerland. And Mel's been taking his material, passing it on to you. I've been getting it. We've been putting it up on my site. I think we put up on my site before we put it up on your site. And what we did is we looked through and we just followed this name, which was a title, and showed that this title was well known as far back as 1400 BC. It's a Ugaritic title, to means the praised one. The Ugarites were the first one to introduce it in 1400 BC. So we're talking about 3,400 years ago. This word was used as the praised one, or altogether lovely in Hebrew. And see, it's a well-known reference. We have written in the Song of Solomon in 1000 BC. 1000 BC in Song of Solomon, chapter 5, verse 16, is the word Mahmed. Mahmed is altogether lovely, which is the same word. Remember, as we said at the beginning of this hour, Arabic has consonantal letters, M, H, M, D. There's no vowels there. It's 4 letters, M, H, M, D. It's the same in Hebrew, M, Ash, or Ch, M, D. The exact same 4 letters are in Hebrew. Surprise, surprise. Why are we surprised by that? Both Hebrew and Arabic come from the same root. So, of course, they have the same letters. So, if it's going to be in Arabic, it's got to be in Hebrew. So, look at the Hebrew antecedents. It's there in Song of Solomon 5:16, the altogether lovely one. Who's that referring to? Song of Solomon? It's referring to King Solomon. He is the altogether lovely one. O daughters of Jerusalem. He was in Jerusalem. So daughters of Jerusalem, which is 5:16, Psalm 5:16, what Muslims have claimed to be Muhammad. They don't know how right they are, but it's not their Muhammad. It's Solomon who lived in Jerusalem, because their Muhammad never was in Jerusalem. He did not have wives in Jerusalem. Can you see the context? Just read the rest of the verse. So that Muhammad is a title referring to Solomon, but Solomon is the name, Muhammad is the title of the altogether lovely. He is altogether lovely. Like, I'm sure your wife has all kinds of titles for you, Abdullah. She might call you the cantankerous one, or the angry one, or the lovely one, or the sexy one, depending on how you come across to her, right? My wife has all kinds of titles for me, and they're not always very pleasing to hear. I have to admit, she has many more negative titles than positive titles, because I'm that kind of guy, because I get excited so quickly. So this is a title for Solomon. But what's fascinating is that in 397 AD, now we're leaving out of BC, we're now going to AD. In 397 AD, we have let me get his name right. His name is Saint Ambrose. Saint Ambrose. So we're talking about the 4th century AD. We're talking about 300 years before Islam. Saint Ambrose took this word out of Song of Solomon, this reference to Muhammad, and referred it to Jesus Christ as the altogether lovely, the praised one, the Messiah. And so he started this action in the 4th century of referring to the Muhammad that is in Song of Solomon 5:16. It's also found in, there's some other references too. It's also found in Psalms chapter 68, verse 16. It's found in Proverbs chapter 12, verse 12. So there are many, in fact, there are 11 places in the Old Testament where you find Muhammad in the Bible. He took it to apply to Jesus Christ, and it stuck. It really stuck really quick. From the 4th century on up to the 5th and to the 6th century, whenever you see Muhammad in a written text in Hebrew and also in Aramaic, which is, again, the same word in Aramaic, because Aramaic, like Hebrew, like Arabic, all come from the same root. There it was referring to Jesus. So this person, this Muhammad, is referring to Jesus from the 4th century on. By the time it gets to the 7th century, you have the coin of Muawiyah. Remember the coin of Muawiyah that we've looked at from over and over again?
Yes.
And on the coin of Muawiyah, you have his image there. And of course, Muawiyah is the caliph, according to Islam, according to the standard Islamic narrative that we started at the beginning of this hour with. He is the one that rules that part of Arabia. He is the one that starts the Umayyad dynasty. And he's living up in Damascus, and he's ruling from 661 all the way up to 680. So for 20 years, he is the caliph up in Damascus. And he is the one that starts minting coins. And his coins are fascinating because we've always been told he's a Muslim. But in almost every one of his coins, most of his coins, not all of them, he is holding a cross. And he has a cross above his head on this coin as well. I could show it to you, but I don't have time to bring it up right now. I should have thought of it beforehand. But you've seen it. We've had it on our programs many times. It's a very famous coin. It's known as the Muawiyah coin, which proves pretty clearly, categorically, if he's holding a cross and he has a cross on his head, he has to be a Christian. Am I correct?
Of course. I mean, why would an Islamic caliph hold a cross or have a cross on his head? I mean, what's the point behind this?
It would be anathema because the cross was a symbol of Christianity. It was always a symbol of Christianity since the 2nd century on. It became the official symbol for the Byzantines as well. So here's Muawiyah. If he is in contradiction, if he is an Arab caliph, which he was, he spoke Arabic, and of course he ruled that part of the world. And he did have his empire, the Umayyad Empire. He started it, but he would not therefore take on a nomenclature that he would be in opposition to, unless, of course, he wasn't in opposition theologically to them. Obviously, he was a Christian. We can see that on the dam there in Taif. You have the dam inscription, a very famous dam inscription from 663, where he calls himself leader of the believers. He is a slave of God or servant of God, Abdullah. That's the word, Abdullah, like your name, Abdul, a slave of God, leader of the believers. Well, what believers is he referring to? Now, every Muslim say, this has to be a Muslim, until you look at the upper left-hand corner, and on the upper left-hand corner, there is a cross there, proving that he was a well-known Christian. But what's curious about this coin is on the back side of the coin. Remember, coins have two sides, and on both sides, they have information. That's why you do. Coins are not just there to give out to people to buy things. Yes, that's the primary purpose. They're also there to let the world know who is in charge. So that's why caliphs and kings and emperors and anybody in power or anybody in authority, the first thing they do when they come to power is to mint coins. You mint coins because they didn't have newspapers. They didn't have internet. They didn't have TV. They didn't have radio back then. They had to use what was at their disposal. And one thing was at their disposal were coins, because coins would be in the hands of everybody. It would be the first thing that they would see. And so they would always put the image, their image. I am now the new king. 661, this is me. And I am a Christian. You always put what denomination you belong to so that you let the world know who you are and what you represented. And you represented Christianity. That's why he has a cross up here, and that's why he's holding a cross over here. On the back side of the coin is the letter M, which means 40. That's how much that coin was worth. 40 numeri. On the top of the M is another cross. Again, a Christian cross. And then on the bottom, guess what's written there? 4 letters. MHMD. Ooh, there it is. Muhammad. Muhammad. There's the Muhammad we're looking for. That's the praised one. So who is the praised one? Well, what's on the cross above it? Who does the cross represent? It represents Jesus Christ. So even Muawiyah, who is supposedly, we've always been told, is a Muslim caliph. No, he's a Christian caliph. That's what he's doing way up in Damascus. If he was Muslim, why isn't he down in Medina?
That's exactly right. And I mean, aside from, let's say Muslims going to argue he wasn't, Christian, fine. But try to explain to me for the sake of just argument, why would an entire dynasty be stationed in Damascus and another one soon will be stationed in Baghdad? What's the point? What about Mecca and Medina? Why would they go north instead of staying centrally located where Islam originated from?
One word answers your answer. There's one word that'll answer you in just one word. You know what that word is?
No.
Water.
I see your point. Yeah, about the I think we did talk about that in a couple of episodes.
all it has to do with water. It's one of the simplest things to respond when Muslims always make this. And they always bring up, and they says, no, 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 no. We know everything happens down in Mecca, Medina. And I say, okay, look at a map. Just look at a map. Look and see where there is and what has always been there. Historically, they've done soil sample after soil sample. There has never been any water down there. Oh, they come up with a Zamzam well. We can shut that one down in 5 minutes. There is not any water that far south. And in order to have, you need to have water to have food. In order to, so if you have water, you have food. If you have food, you have people, because people need to eat. They have to eat, therefore they have to have water to eat and to drink. Once you have people, then you have towns. But in order to have towns, once you have people, then you have towns. And without water, you don't have a town. Without water, you don't have cities. Without water, you don't have civilizations. And without water, you don't have history. That's why in almost every case, when the Muslims try to come back all the time, and they say, yes, we know that there is no water there, but it doesn't matter because we know Adam and Eve were sent there. Listen, if Adam and Eve were sent there, that means it's the oldest place in history. That means everybody should have known about this place. We can't find one reference in any map, on any documentation at all, until the 8th century. It doesn't appear anywhere until the 8th century, which is 100 years after Muhammad, on any documentation. It doesn't appear in any map until the 10th century. And that's why all of Ptolemy's maps, they don't have it. Oh, they try to say Makaraba is it. Look and see, you can see where Makaraba is. First of all, it doesn't even mean Mecca. It's the wrong consonants. Remember, we're getting back to the consonants again. Makaraba, Makara, the place of the Carib, and we know where that is. That is right in down. We now have been able to place it because we can look at where Ptolemy was just showing where the rivers are and where the mountains are. That is in northern Yemen today. That's where it is. It's way too down. It's 400 miles further to the south. So Makaraba is not Mecca. But in every case, you're going to have a real problem here, because if there is no water down there, and even Medina was not called Medina, it was called Yathrib. It was only about the time of the 7th century, it was a small hamlet around an oasis. And according to all the authorities that we're getting now, according to the authorities, there was only about 200 people that lived in Yathrib. Now, if only 200 people lived in Yathrib, then how could you have a man, even, let's say there was a Muhammad down there, a praised one down there. There are no Jews down there. We don't have any reference to any Jews that far south. They don't go further south than Tabuk. There are no Christians down that far south. If there are no Jews and no Christians that far south, look at your Quran. Just open up the Quran and read it. What's in it? It's dispute after dispute after dispute with the Christians and the Jews. It's theological dispute after theological dispute. There's a polemic after polemic against the Christians, against the Jews. These are really great theology. And you can see there's reference after reference against all the Old Testament prophets. It's the wrong references. It's the wrong stories. But much of this Quran is about Judaism and Christianity. If there are no Jews and Christians in a little hamlet that's only made up of 200 people, how did this book come about in such a small place where there were no Jews and Christians to even talk about or to have this kind of theological discussion? More than that, look at the Arabic that's in here. Read the Arabic. It has the tar marbuta. It has the alif maksura. It has the definite article. These are well known. This is what you use. That is Nabatean Aramaic Arabic. Al-Jalad, who's been doing his work on this, that Arabic exists way up in what is today Jordan, 600 miles to the north. That Arabic is not from Mecca, Medina. The Arabic that would have been used in the 7th century in Mecca, Medina is known as Sabaic Arabic, which comes from Yemen, from the Sabaeans, who are down in the south. So that's why all of this, you've got the wrong script, you've got the wrong person, you've got the wrong town, you've got the wrong place, you've got the wrong temperature, and you've got a desert where nothing could have flourished. So there's no way that the Quran could have been put together that far south. There's no way anybody could have lived that far south who would have had a huge empire. They would have been able to go up and seize all these places. And that's why we don't have any references to Abu Bakr, Umar, Uthman, and Ali making all these raids. Where are all these raids happening? They only happen in the traditions, all of which were written in the 9th and 10th century. Have you heard me say that, 9th and 10th century?
Jay, we have Sister Farida here actually, and saying that you've been debunked by Mansour. Would you like to?
Yeah, well, how have I been debunked by Mansour?
I don't know. You know how Farid is. Farid is just a dreamer. He just thinks that anyone who says something different than what he thinks, somehow.
Let me tell you, last time I talked to Mansour was in 2019. We were there at Speaker's Corner, and I was introducing Dan Brubaker's book. He came and put his ladder next to me, right? Now, who is Mansour? For those of you who don't know who we're talking about, Mansour Ahmed is his name. He's from Bangladesh. And he's been at Speaker's Corner for many, many years. We have gone at each other. It's been terrific. We've had many debates. You can see the debates. They're up on Fander Films. He's taken them off, I think, his site. But they're there on my site, so you can still see them, including this one, 2019. So we're talking about 5 years ago. And I was there introducing Dan Brubaker's book in June of 2019. He puts his ladder next to me, and he wants to shut me down. Now, I don't know for sure, but I've been told that that he works on the Islamic Awareness website. The Islamic Awareness website is the IA website is the largest Islamic website that keeps all of the manuscripts. They have a whole treasure trove of the earliest Arabic and Quranic and other manuscripts. So he is responsible for this manuscripts, from what I've been told. So he should know what he's talking about. And so he comes up, puts his ladder next to me, uninvited, and starts haranguing me and says, Jay, you have no idea what you're talking about. We can trace our Quran back to Muhammad. We have both oral and he said both oral and textual examples right back to Muhammad. So I quickly shut down what I was saying, turned to him, said, this is fun. Okay, let's do this. So you say you have oral and text. Well, we can't say oral. Who cares about oral? That's just summation. That's just supposition. There's no way you can show me because you have no oral recording. There's no recordings back in the 7th century to prove that you had oral, but textual. Now you're in my side. Okay, so you have a textual tradition that goes all the way back to Muhammad. You have a complete text that goes back to Muhammad. No. Uthman, he said. Uthman. Okay. So Uthman. So you have a textual tradition. That means you have a book that I have in my hand here, 114 surahs. All 114 surahs, as big as what I have right here, that goes all the way back to Uthman, 652. Yes, we have a whole. I said, what's its name? Give me the name of that manuscript. He went quiet. He didn't say, you can see it. I've got it up on my site. Go look and see what happened next. I said, so you just said you have a textual tradition that goes all the way back. You don't have anything from Uthman, right? Not one manuscript. Not the Petropolitans, not the Samarkand, not the, you're not going to use the Topkapi because that's from 100 years later. In fact, we're finding that may be 150 years later. So you can't find one manuscript that you're talking about. So how about the 7th century? So I've moved from 650 to 699. I said, how about before 699? Do you have anything in the century Muhammad lived? A book like this, 114 surahs, every word, every letter, just like what I have in my hand today. He was quiet. And then he says, from the 1st century of Islam, we have 97%. From the 1st century of it. Now I said, hold on a minute. The 1st century of Islam starts from 622 and goes to 719. 622 to 719. So now you're moving into the 8th century, right? 719. That's roughly 20 years into this 8th century. Okay. Do you have a complete manuscript like we have here, word for word, 114 surahs by 719? He was quiet. You can see it. It's fun. The crowd was huge by that time. So this lady who's coming on and saying that he has shut me down, look and see what he does next. He says, we have 97%. I said, in one book? No. We have 97. Go up on Islamic Awareness website and you can see it. So I went up there the next day because I was at Speaker's Corner.
Is that the one, the chart that we destroyed a couple of times in
yes.
video series?
I'm telling you, have Farida, this lady Farida, have her go up on Islamic Awareness website. And
Farida doesn't know anything. Farida is needing attention right now. That's all.
Let's give her the chance. I want her to come back next week. So go up on Islamic Awareness website and look and see what Mansour has done. It's his material. I'm assuming he's the one that put it there. He does have 97% of the Quran. Guess what it is? It's 63 different manuscripts, but they're not manuscripts. There's a verse here, there's a little scrap here, another scrap here, maybe 2 verses here, another 3. It's 63 fragments is what it is.
And they span over a time. It's not all of them at a specific time zone. Time or a date, for instance. So even the later ones.
Oh, I decided, I got my whole team on this. I said, this is going to be fun. Let's see how many of these 63, right? 63. Let me just bring it up here. I want to see how many of these 63 actually are before 719. Since he made the claim, I wanted to find out. So we decided to go up there. This is what we found. Hold on a minute. Give me about 2 seconds to get to it. Of the 63 fragments he found, So 20 of them are tentatively dated. No one's done or hasn't come to any conclusions. 9 of them he should never have used, and these are the biggest ones, including the Ma'il manuscript. The Ma'il takes 50% of what he's looking for is the one at the top of the line, which covers 50%, and that's the Ma'il, which is the British Library. He should never have used that one because that's from 790. That's from the late 8th century. It's not from the early 8th century at all. It is over 150 years after Muhammad. So he should never use those 9. 20 of them, no one has come to any conclusion on, though there is some there is some research, and the other 34 of the 63, no one's done any work on whatsoever. They just grabbed them because they needed them. They had no idea what the dates are. He was lying through his teeth. Now, here's what's interesting. They're still up there today. They're still lying today. Even though you have put it up, I have put it up, we have shut down every one of these. They should not have any of those 63 up there because nobody has come to conclusion on them. None of them are really valid. All of them are either late or tentative, or they have no supporting evidence whatsoever. So then I'd like her to answer me on this. Find out why Mansour will not be able to come up with one Quran from before 719, not one Quran whatsoever.
Exactly. I mean, it's a simple question. So anyway, so we were talking about the name Muhammad. What else beside, now we talked about the book, we talked about the man. What else?
Okay, and this is the third area that we're going into, and I have to be careful because I haven't gone public with it. You don't even know what I'm talking about. There's a guy named Fadi who's a Muslim blogger who hates my guts, and he's always trying to shut me down. So I've got a whole slew of videos that he has done that were sent to me and said, Jay, you need to respond to this. And this Farid guy who speaks fluent Arabic has...
By the way, this is the Farid we're talking about right here.
I'm sorry, which one? Sorry.
The one that I told you, Sister Farida, that's my nickname for Farid.
Oh, is that him? Okay. So he has come up and he has tried to say that that I have no idea what I'm talking about when I talk about Ibn Hisham and Al-Waqidi, 833 that he died. Al-Waqidi died in 835. Al-Buhari 870. Sahih Muslim 875. Tirmidhi, Dawud, and all the others, and then we have Al-Tabari 923. He says those dates you have no idea what you're talking about. There are many that are earlier than that. And he talked about Ibn Sa'd, and he started naming about 5 or 6, and he said he picked them off the shelf. Says, see, I have Ibn Sa'd here, and he gives me the date. Then he have here, and he gives me the date. And then what he did is he took one of my timelines, and he put them on the timeline, right? And says, see, Jay doesn't know what he's talking about because these are all earlier. I loved it. So I don't want to say what I'm going to say because I want to get up and I want Farid to watch this. So Farid's listening. In about a week or two, I'm going to put up the same timeline that he put up, and I'm going to take every one of those that he claimed, and I'm going to show him that not one of them is from the 7th or the 8th or the 9th or the 10th century. They don't even begin to appear until the 12th up until the 18th century. See, what he doesn't know is when he doesn't know when the first extant manuscript for any of these writings is. That's what he hasn't done. Every one of these are nothing more than attributions. You know what an attribution is?
Exactly. And you know, this is the problem, Jay. They will come up with these big, like Ibn Kathir. Ibn Kathir said this. Al-Tabari said, okay, when did Ibn Kathir say it? When did he even live? When did Al-Tabari say it? When did he even live? Who reported these things about them? So they're attributed to somebody that somehow we have to believe they existed in the 7th century. Yet you don't have a manuscript to prove that they even wrote it at that time.
Well, I mean, this is what's really exciting. Let's just take, we've done this before, you and I. Let's just take Ibn Hisham. We love Ibn Hisham, don't we? Because he's the one that we've used the most. And Ibn Hisham, let me just see if I can find it here. If I can just bring this up real quickly. Ibn Hisham is the one that we have by far more than anybody else because of the fact that he is so prolific and everybody has to quote him because in order to know who you are, who you're talking about, you've got to go by Ibn Hisham. And we've always said that Ibn Hisham is 833. Because that's when he died. And therefore, when we look at the biography of Muhammad, it always says Ibn Ishaq. Now that's a misnomer because we have nothing from Ibn Ishaq. Only thing we have is from Ibn Hisham. And you and I have said that over and over again. This is from Ibn Hisham. We have lied through our teeth because we didn't know any better. Because everybody has been told that it's Ibn Hisham. It's not even Ibn Hisham. Ibn Hisham has nothing to do with Muhammad's biography. The Siratu Rasulullah does not come from Ibn Hisham. It comes from Heinrich Ferdinand Wustenfeld. Heinrich Ferdinand Wustenfeld is a German scholar who decided, because by the time of the 1800s, so the 19th century, there was nothing written about this man, Muhammad, though everybody was following him. There were millions of billions of people that were following him. Because nothing had been written about him in any form, decided to go, and just in Germany, he didn't leave Germany. He went to 4 different German cities, went to 4 different German universities and 2 different museums in those cities. And as an Arabist, he went and tried to find all the scraps, fragments, like what Mansur Ahmad had done with the Quran. He just found fragments, all in Arabic. And he put them together in a chronological form so he can make a history of this man, Muhammad. And he wrote that in a 2-year period between 1858 and 1860, published it in 1860, but he attributed it back to Ibn Ishaq. That's why it says Ibn Ishaq on the cover. And from that, you have Alfred Guillaume. Then Alfred Guillaume took that and then translated it from German into French, which is then translated into English, which you and I have to read. And that's the history of Muhammad that all of us read, all written by Alfred Guillaume, attributed to Ibn Ishaq, who is attributed to Ibn Hisham. And none of us have questioned it until Dr. Robert Kerr started laughing at me when I was talking to him about 2 years ago. And he says, Jay, it has nothing to do with Ibn Hisham. This has to do with Henrik Feinrich Wood. It is a German scholar who is actually the one that put it all together from scraps, mostly from the Ottoman period. Again, notice almost everything we're finding is from the Ottoman period, including these things I'm going to hit Farid with. Farid has no idea what's going to hit him yet. He has no idea. I'm not going to sit and laugh like he laughed at me, but I'm going to sit and ask him, if you're going to say that these are from this person, then give me a manuscript from that person from the time that he lived, just from the time period he lived. That's all we're asking. See, what Wustenfeld did is he grabbed all this material and then he redacted it back. It's called redaction. He redacted it back to Ibn Hisham, who then he said got it from Ibn Ishaq. But no one had found Ibn Ishaq, so therefore he got it from a student of Ibn Ishaq, and he threw out what he didn't like and only retained what he did. And we've said this for years, you and I. Well, this has nothing to do with Ibn Hisham. It has to do with a German scholar living 166 years ago. God bless him. He did us a great favor. But can you see how the whole world has been lied to? When Muslims claim that this comes from Ibn Hisham, it does not come from Ibn Hisham. It's only attributions. And that's all we're getting. The same thing, the standard Islamic narrative is full of attributions. Attribution after attribution after attribution. None of it is historical.
Not only that, let's talk about hadith, for instance. Not only the hadith was allegedly collected for the first time in a written form 240 years after the death of Muhammad, if you want to even prove that someone by the name Bukhari did something like this, the earliest manuscript of his work are 500 years later.
Hold on. All coming out in about 2 weeks. So don't say that yet. We have to put that up there. And I'm going to put everyone. I'm going to show you where Al-Bukhari is. I'm going to show you what the earliest extant manuscript. For those who don't understand what I'm talking about, the earliest manuscript that we have in our hands today that was supposedly written. It's written there so we can look at it. We're going to show you the dates, and I'm going to put them on a timeline. And Farid, I don't know how he's going to respond to this. But this is why, listen, as Christians, we had to do this with our Lord Jesus Christ. We had to do this with his historicity. When Wellhausen came up in the 1800s and said the same thing about Jesus, you don't have any reference for him. You have no idea if this man even existed. We have no idea whether he died on the cross. We don't even know if he's historical. And caught us with our trousers down. We didn't. And in the 1800s, we hadn't done our homework. In the same way, the Muslims haven't done their homework. Farid hasn't done his homework. Everything he quotes is from standard Islamic narrative, none of which is historical. And so as Christians, we had to go find out where Jesus was. We had to find out who knew about him. We had to go back to the early historians from the first century. We had to go back to Thales and Phlegon, who were debating the death of Jesus in 52 AD and mentioned that when he died, the earth shook and the sun went dark. These are not Christians. These are Greek satirists who are debating this 20 years after Christ's death. They were already talking about his death. And we have to go to Tacitus, who hated Christians. He was a Roman historian, had nothing good to say about Christianity, was not a Christian at all. And yet he tells us when Christ died and says it happened under Pontius Pilate during during the reign of Tiberius. That's why we know it's in 33 AD. So because of the fact that we've gone back to the historians to prove that Jesus did exist, to prove that he died, even Josephus, who is a Jewish historian living in Rome in the 2nd century, refers to the death of Jesus, and then he says, curiously, and the Christians believe he rose from the dead. Not that he believed it, but at least that shows that from within 100 years of Christ's death, you already have a secular historian quoting this. So that's why it's so good that we've been able to do that. Why have Muslims not done this? Because none of us have held them accountable. We're now holding them accountable. So I'm going to hold Fadi accountable. He was laughing at me. I'm not going to laugh at him. I'm just going to say, listen, until you can find extant manuscript for Ibn Sa'd, extant manuscript for Ibn Ishaq, extant manuscript for Ibn Hisham, Al-Waqidi, Sahih Muslim, Ibn Dawud, Tirmidhi, and tell me where the dates for their extant manuscript that predate what I'm going to show you, you might as well put those books back up on the shelf again.
Well, Jay, it will be my honor and pleasure to refute that babbler together, one of these days, hopefully. But I have to tell you, you are expecting too much from Farid. You're expecting him to do the research. That's not who he is. He can't do any of these things.
Well,
he just goes by whatever he thinks everybody else is going to just believe. Just because he's from Bahrain, he speaks Arabic, somehow he's an authority.
Again, I don't care dillis what language they speak. I want evidence. Show me evidence in your hand. That's all I'm asking. Okay?
Very good. What else you want to share with people about? You already alluded to.
I want to also talk about Muhammad a little bit more, because there's this thing, yes, but Jay, they always come back and says, Jay, there are lots of references to him, even within your tradition. He's referred to, like Thomas the Presbyter in 634 mentions him. And it mentions Thomas the Presbyter in 634 says about this, and there are only 5 references to this name Muhammad in any external sources from the 7th and 8th century. 7th century, there's only 4. There's 1 in the 8th century. Let's just look at each one of those, one by one. All the other ones, there's not a name Muhammad. It's just a soldier or a brigand or someone who is coming with a sword, who is battling, which could be anybody. It could be anybody. But these 5, let's shut these 5 down, because these are the ones that almost everybody throws at me and says you've got to come up with a response. This guy named Muhammad, who is supposedly looks like he is the Muhammad of Islam. So Thomas the Presbyter in 634 writes about this Tayyaye de Muhammad, and he uses MHMT, not a D, but a T, which means it's a Persian spelling. Where do the Persians live? In Iraq. This is in Iraq. In fact, this is a Lakhmit spelling for the name. That's why Lakhmits are from northern Iraq. And he mentions that he's having a battle. This Muhammad, this praised one, is having a battle with the Romans in Gaza. Hold on a minute. Do you remember Muhammad ever going to Gaza and battling the Byzantines? No. There's nothing in any of the tradition. He never went that far north. And he did not have his name as Muhammad. So this is a completely different Muhammad. This is not the Muhammad of Arabia. This is the Muhammad of what we know today as Tikrit. He is from northern Iraq. He is a Lakhmid Muhammad, the praised one. So obviously we need to know exactly because most of the warriors at that time, they use Muhammad as a title for endearment. They would be the praised one, the one who destroyed Jerusalem in 638, referred to himself as the Muhammad. But he came from Hira, which is from Iraq again, near just south of Baghdad. In 636, then you have a flyleaf which talks about the Arabs of Muhammad. Now, this is the Arabic spelling for Muhammad. This is the correct spelling, MHMD. That he killed many Syrians in Yarmouk, or what is Gabbatha. Now, take a look at where Yarmouk is. It is way up in Syria, right on the border between Jordan and Syria, way up in the north. That's 1,200 miles away. And that we don't know of any person, we don't know of Muhammad, the Arabic Muhammad, going anywhere near that far, nor would he ever have a battle that would be in that part of the world. In the 660s, Sabaeus talks about an Ishmaelite, the line of Ishmael. So he'd be an Arab, like most of you Nabateans would be Ishmaelites. Almost all your Arabs in that world would be Ishmaelites. So he's an Ishmaelite, not a Muslim. Notice he calls him an Ishmaelite, called Muhammad. Here is that Persian spelling again, who with 12,000 Israelites, 12,000 Jews, attacked the invading Byzantine army. Now stop and think and scratch your head. Do you know of any battle at all in 660s of any Israelites or any Jews, 12,000 of them. That's a pretty big number. Why is it we don't have any record of that anywhere? And Sabaeus says this, but so obviously this is not even historical. It's too far north, once again, too far north, and it's referring to a battle that there were no Ishmaelites and Jews battling against on record at all. So obviously this cannot, either Sabaeus didn't know what he was talking about, or he was doing hyperbole here. And then in 690, you have John Bar Penkeah, who talks about Muhammad, who's a teacher leader of the Arabs. Now, here's the problem. Look where he places him. He places him up in Damascus. Muhammad living in Damascus? Did Muhammad even go to Damascus? So you can see it's way too far north. But hold on, look at the date, 690. 690. Actually, we should start seeing Muhammad by this time because he is on the Dome of the Rock in this time period. 691, 692. He's also on the coins of Abdul Malik, 691. He's also on the coins of 693 and 696. We have the coins. I own the coins of 696. And there's Muhammad's name, Muhammad, MHMD. So by this time, Muhammad is now starting to form, 690. But notice it says it places him, again, way up north. It places him in around Jerusalem. Muhammad never lived in Jerusalem. He lived way down in Mecca, Medina. So we've got the wrong Muhammad again. And then we come to John of Damascus. Now we're in the 8th century. And this is the 5th time that we see this name, Muhammad. What's fascinating is look what he says about this Muhammad. Again, he calls him an Ishmaelite, and he calls it that this is a heresy of the Ishmaelites. Doesn't refer to him as a Muslim, doesn't refer to any religion called Islam, doesn't refer to any book called the Quran, though it says that this Muhammad has a book, but not just one book, 4 books. He has the book called The Cow, which is today in the Quran, Surah 2. He has a book called The Women, which is today in the Quran, Surah 4. And then he has a book called The Table, which is in the Quran today, Surah 5. And then fourthly, he has a book called The Camel, which is not in the Quran today, no surah. It doesn't exist at all. So whoever this Muhammad was and whatever book he had on him or was creating in 730, so this is 100 years after Muhammad, we're talking about well into the 8th century, he was an Ishmaelite. He was named called Muhammad. So now if Muhammad is beginning to get formed, that would make sense because they now needed a book. They need to have a prophetic in the Ishmaelite line. See, remember, they needed an identity. In order to have an identity to compete with the Jews and the Christians, they had to have their own Ishmaelite line. They had a prophetic line in the Ishmaelite tradition. And every prophet has a book. So now you can see the books is starting to be borrowed. But take a look and see where they're borrowing from. And notice, at this time in 730, they only had 4 books, only 4 surahs. One of which didn't even exist. It doesn't exist today. So they must have thrown that out subsequently to that. So can you see, I have no problem with believing there was Muhammad in the 7th century, but he's not the Muhammad of Arabia. He's not the Muhammad of Mecca and Medina. He's not the Muhammad of the Hijaz. That Muhammad is either living in Damascus or Jerusalem or is fighting battles in Gaza, and his name is from what is today Tikrit in northern Iraq. It is all that those are the Syrian Muhammads, the Nabatean Muhammads, and the Iraqi Muhammads, or as we know as the Lakbid Muhammads. So listen, that's a common name. And these are all people using it as a title, not a name, but as a title. So that's why we're shutting those all down. You've got to make sure you get the right name in the right period. Don't take the Muhammad of today and redact them back. Just like don't take the Sirah today and redact it back onto Ibn Hisham, or don't take the Tafsir and the Tahriq or to redact them back on Al-Tabari. We're going to shut that one down in about 2 weeks. So all of this, as we're finding, these are nothing more than attributions.
Wonderful. And of course, you and I, hopefully, when we meet in the studio, we should address those topics again that you will be revealing soon.
Yeah, what we're going to do in the studio when you and I get together, we're going to actually put this up so that you can see visually. We're going to put up slide by slide by slide by slide. Because right now I'm just telling you, and I could just be making a fool of myself. And people will say, look at Jay, he's just talking to the top of his head. No, we're going to show you maps. We're going to show you timelines. We're going to show you quotations. And I'm going to show you, I'm going to show you the different, the categories. But especially, I'm going to show you the dates. This is something Muslims don't want us to do. I know Fadi does not want me to put dates on any of those extant manuscripts. He would just like to continue to believe that these all existed in the 7th century. No, they didn't. Not one of them come from the 7th century. They don't even come from the 8th century. They don't even come from the 9th century. Not one of these come from the 7th or the 8th or the 9th century. They only start to appear in 950. That's the 10th century and later.
Right. Absolutely. There is so many things like this, of course. What else, Jay? Is there anything else you want to share with us? Otherwise,
I want to share with you today. There's still other things that are on the boiler. I don't want to bring them up yet because we really need to go and actually get them online. We need to get them, upload them, and then we can unpack them.
Very good. And please tell people how they can track with you and follow you.
On your site and my site, some of the stuff will be going. This stuff that I'm doing now will go up on my site before I get it off to yours because it's all brand new. And that's Fander Films, PFANDERFILMS, Fander Films. And I have about half as many subscribers as you do. You have almost up to 200,000. I have 100,000. And so I'm coming behind you, looking up to you. But it's so good to know that we're both working towards the same thing, the same goal.
Amen, brother. Amen. It really has nothing to do with the numbers. It's about the content, and I think people enjoy the content that you bring. And the videos always have really very high views. So praise God for that. Well, brother, thank you so much as always. And I would love really, and I mentioned that to you many times in the past. I know our schedules didn't permit that to happen. I would love it every few weeks that we will pop in and just give updates about progress in this area.
Well, we're going to be doing some recordings together. So when we do that, we'll do an awful lot of new stuff.
Absolutely. Thank you, brother. And thank you, everyone, for joining us. I see Corretti also is able to join us. It's kind of early in the morning over there, but we thank God for his ministry as well in Nigeria. So thank you, Corretti, and thank you, everybody. And until we meet next time, brother, have a blessed day.
God bless you. God bless all of you.
Take care, everyone.